Welcome to the Center for Jewish History's Family History Today series of genealogy-themed public programs. My name is Moriah Amit, and I'm the Senior Genealogy Librarian at the Center for Jewish History. The center provides a collaborative home for 5 in-house partner organizations that together form the largest archive on the modern Jewish experience outside of Israel. In addition, the center houses the Ackman and Ziff Family Genealogy Institute, which is where I am based. At the Institute, we strive to connect researchers to the wealth of genealogy resources at the center and to make family history accessible to researchers of all ages, abilities, and levels of experience, whether Jewish or non-Jewish. Okay, so I have a few housekeeping notes before we get started. As I just mentioned, this program is being recorded. That means that within a few weeks, you'll be able to watch the video on the Center for Jewish History's YouTube channel. Those who do wish to be on camera, you feel free to turn your camera on at any point. I am keeping you muted for now. I'm going to be doing a slideshow as part of this session, and after the slideshow, anyone is welcome to turn on their microphone as long as you speak one at a time. Okay, so a little about the format of tonight's session. I will first answer a few selected questions from those that I received from you in advance. The questions have been generalized, so they can be used to illustrate search paths that may be relevant to many of you. If I don't answer a question that you emailed me, don't worry, you will still receive a response by email from a member of our staff or one of our volunteers at the Genealogy Institute. If you didn't email a question in advance, or you have a follow-up question regarding one of the answers that I provide, please enter your question in the chat box at any time during the session. And I will certainly endeavor to answer a selection of these questions in the remaining portion of the program. Lastly, this program features live captions, which have been made possible through the support of the Institute for Museum and Library Services. If you'd like to view the captions for this program, click on the closed caption or CC button, which is at the bottom of your screen, and then click Show Subtitles. Before I continue, can someone please verify that you can hear me clearly? Okay, I'm getting multiple hands. Thank you. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead with the selected questions that were emailed to me in advance. So I'm going to share my screen with you now. Oops, wrong screen. Sorry about that. I'm going to go to a different screen. Oh no, no, okay. I want to go to this one. Okay. Just not on the right page yet. Bear with me. Thank you. Okay. Sorry about that. I need to try this again. Okay, I'll just leave it on here for now. Okay, so tonight is the second of 2 sessions that we've hosted that we've called Ask a Genealogy Librarian. Today, my colleague, J.D. Arden, led the first session, which was primarily about finding records in archives overseas. Today, we're going to talk about US specific research and within both online and archival, using both online and archival resources. So Oh, and just a quick note that this program is supported in part by a grant from our funder, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs. All right, so now we're going to get to the questions. So question 1 came from Richard. I don't know if you're here today, Richard, but if not, you'll watch this later, I hope. So this question is, in particular, is about immigration through Canada. And Richard said, my wife's great-grandparents emigrated from Lithuania to the US in the late 1800s. But we haven't found any records of their immigration. We think that they may have come through Canada. How can I find Canadian immigration records such as passenger arrival lists and records of border crossings from Canada to the US? That is a great question. I know that a lot of people of Jewish ancestry can trace their immigrant ancestors' journeys to the US through Canada. That was actually quite common. This is especially true as the US became more restrictive in their immigration policies. So there are actually, so I will say, first of all, if you're not sure whether your family immigrated through Canada, there are a couple of places that you can look to see if you might find evidence of that. The first is in your immigrant ancestors' US naturalization papers, the papers that they would have filled out in order to become a US citizen. Those papers typically asked the person to specify their port of entry and date of entry, and the name of the ship, or if they did not come by ship, of course, they would include the name of the border that they came through, and the date. And another place where you might find similar information is in your in the passport applications of family members who became US citizens, because they would have also been asked similar questions on those applications. So where can you go to find those kinds of records? Ancestry, actually, is the greatest source of all of those types of records that I'm going to introduce to you in a minute. And for those of you who do not wish to subscribe to Ancestry from home, you can go to your nearest, you can contact your nearest public library and see if they offer free access. At the Center for Jewish History, we do offer free access through our, at our Genealogy Institute. We are currently welcoming walk-ins again, and though we do recommend that you make an appointment just to guarantee your spot at a computer. And just to reiterate, we can only provide access to Ancestry on site. It's not something that we can offer to people from home. The same is going to be true for most of your public libraries. There might still be some public libraries out there that are providing access from home using your library card, but check with your individual public library to see what their policies are. Okay, so what kinds of immigration records can you find that will give you some more information about your family's journey to Canada and then from Canada to the US? So first of all, there's the arrival in Canada. Ancestry has Canadian passenger arrival lists at various ports on the east and western sides of Canada. And these go all the way from 1865 through 1935. Once your ancestors arrived in Canada, they may have filled out or they may have been pre-examined in Canada for further immigration into the US. So that particular category of records is called the records of aliens pre-examined in Canada, and aliens meaning non-citizens. These date from 1904 to 1954. Then when we get to people coming from, immigrants coming from Canada into the US, there are, of course, land border crossings. So there's a list, there's a large number of records of Canada to US land border crossings on Ancestry at various points of entry, again, in the eastern and western sides of the country, from 1895 through 1960. And in case they came by ship through Lake Michigan, which certainly did happen in a number of instances, then there are also Michigan passenger arrival lists at various ports in Michigan from 1903 to 1965. So I'm going to show you what that looks like to get to those particular record groups. So this is the Ancestry Library Edition. If you have a home subscription, this initial page is going to look a little bit different for you. But bear in mind that you will always have a search tab at the top of your screen. And if you click on that search tab, unfortunately, I can't click on it right now because my controls are right on top of that. See if I can get to it somewhere else. Okay, so what you want to click on under search is the card catalog. I see there are some chat questions, so I'm going to take a look. Okay, so a few people had questions about the first session. Yes, that was recorded, and the recording is available online now on our YouTube channel. Carol, that's a great question. I will address it if there's time later. Thank you, Janice, for providing the link to the video of the previous session. So yeah, you should all be able to get to it there. Okay, moving along. Okay, so let's say you want to look for a relative's, a record of a relative's border crossing. So I'm going to go ahead and type in Canada border crossing in the keyword search. And here we go. So it's a little tricky, but keep in mind the direction in which your ancestors were going. So there are border crossings of people who went from the US to Canada. That's this first one that you see. And then there are those border crossings from Canada into the US. So that's what we're gonna select now. And I'm just gonna do a sample search for a Hyman Levy. And you can put in additional information like the person's birth date or approximately when you think that they arrived in the US. But for now, I'm going to leave that information out. Okay. So this is the Hyman Levy that I was looking for. He was born around 1898 in Russia. His arrival date, meaning his arrival in the US, was April 1921, and he arrived at, or he made the crossing into Buffalo. So now I'm going to open the border crossing itself, because that's a kind of document that many of you may not have seen before. You're probably somewhat familiar with ship passenger lists, but this is going to look a little bit different. So this is called the list of alien passengers applying for admission. At the Port of Buffalo. And if we scroll down to, just make this a little bit larger. Here's Hyman Levy. His age, marital status, he's single. His occupation, clock operator, it looks like to me. He spoke Yiddish. His nationality is Russian. Or wait, does that say nationality? Yes, nationality is Russian. And his, what they called race at that time, was Hebrew, meaning Jewish. Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. Here he is. So this is the name of a person that he left behind in the old country. That's his father, Abraham Levy, who I believe was in Biela Circa, something like that. Biela Circa, which potentially is the place where Hyman was born, although not necessarily. And his destination is New Haven. So that's the kind of all the sorts of information you can find. Oh, and I forgot one point here, which is his previous residence before entering the US was in Toronto. So he definitely lived in Toronto. We don't know for how long, but for some period of time before making the journey into the US. Okay. A cloak operator. Thank you, Rena or Alan. That makes more sense, that he was a cloak operator and worked in the garment industry. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to now go back to my screen share here and go down to question number 2. And if you have any follow-up questions on question number 1, you're welcome to write those in the chat box. But I'm going on to the next question, which comes from Susan, who wrote, "A few of my American family members tried to sponsor their European relatives' immigration to the US right before World War II. I know they would have completed and signed affidavits affirming their desire and ability to sponsor their European family members. Where were those affidavits submitted? Where are they kept now? And how may I obtain copies?" So, another great question. It's definitely something that a lot of people have heard about in terms of how their families may have come over to the US. It's sometimes referred to as chain migration, although that term is somewhat has a somewhat negative connotation now. And essentially, this kind of immigration pattern happened through all of the different waves of Jewish immigration to the US. But of course, it became especially poignant in the years leading up to World War II, as people were, family members who were living in the US were desperately trying to get their European relatives out of Europe and to safety in the US. So where were those affidavits submitted? As you may expect, they would have been submitted to the Immigration and Naturalization Service, or INS. This organization is now known as the USCIS, which is Citizenship and Immigration Service, but that name was changed relatively recently. So all of your immigrant ancestors would have known the organization as the Immigration and Naturalization Service. So next question, where are they kept now? That is a kind of complicated answer. So first of all, these sponsorship affidavits could be located in two types of files. The first is in visa files. So of course, actually, you may not know this, but starting in 1924, visas were required for all immigrants coming into the US. Before that, it was not a requirement. So, beginning in 1924, if an immigrant was considered a likely public charge, meaning that they did not have enough money to support themselves and would have had to seek out social services, the government could ask for an affidavit of support to support the visa application. So to help, so if a family member living in the US could vouch for their ability to provide for that immigrant financially, then they would be less likely to be categorized as a likely public charge and more likely to be admitted, of course. So if such an affidavit was required and supplied, it will now be found in that visa file that I mentioned. The era of visa files is 1924 to 1944. So that is the period that Susan is certainly asking about. And these visa files are now with the US Citizenship and Immigration Service, or USCIS. Unfortunately, what that means is you can only request the file through the USCIS. And an important thing to note about requesting anything from the USCIS is that the person whose document you are requesting must have been born more than 100 years ago, or if not more than 100 years ago, then you would need to provide a proof of their death. So in other words, you certainly can't request a document for a person who's still alive. And if you're looking for somebody who's deceased, you have to either prove their death or they have to have been born more than 100 years ago. These requests can only be made online, and I will say at this point they are quite expensive. I hope that does change in the future. There's certainly been some advocacy work to put pressure on the USCIS to lower their fees, but that has not been effective yet, to my knowledge. One alternative, if you are having trouble going through the USCIS website, is you can also place a request through the FOIA website, which is the Freedom of Information Act website on the State Department website. Okay, so moving on to the next time period that might be relevant to your search. If you're looking for someone who immigrated from 1944 onwards, their affidavits would be contained in something called an A file, and A stands for alien. And that's for immigrants who were born, So this gets even more complicated at this point, because the A files are then divided amongst two different institutions. For those who were born before 1909, those files are held at the National Archives. And for those who were born from 1909 on, they're at the US Citizenship and Immigration Service. So the same rules apply, as I mentioned, for the visa files, for those A files, again, for a person born from 1909 on. For those that are pertaining to immigrants born before 1909, you can actually search the National Archives catalog to see if there is an A file in the National Archives. So I will give you a quick preview of what that looks like. Chat, let's see. Okay, Marcy has a detailed question, so I will try to get to it at the end. Let's see. Yes, these are all great questions, but they are more detailed than I can handle at the moment. So I'm going to move on to the demo now. And okay, so this is the catalog of the National Archives. And it's actually quite a simple search. You can just, if you're typing in a name, I do recommend that you enclose it in quotation marks like this. So if you're looking, for example, for Sarah Berman, we can see right away that there is a file, an alien case file for Sarah Berman. And let's see. So she was born, as we can see, before 1909. That's why these are now at the National Archives. We find out that her country of origin is listed as Russia. She came to the US through the port of New York. Here is her date of entry, April 1st, 1908. And she filed for naturalization in New York on June 26, 1944. So you would take all of those pieces of information into consideration to determine whether this is in fact the person that you are looking for. And then you can place a request for a copy of this record using, let's see, using these identifier numbers here. There is a place on the National Archives website where you can order records online. And so I would recommend being as detailed as possible when you make these requests, including those identifier numbers and other basic information about the person, like when they were born, when they entered the US, and so forth. Okay. Again, if you have any follow-up questions, please enter those in the chat box. I will now be moving on to the third question, which is on a completely different topic now. So history, exploring the history of a building. So this is also something that I know is of interest. I've had actually had a speaker come to the center and give a lecture on the subject before. Okay, so let's talk about building ownership. Helene asks, from the early to mid 1900s, my grandfather owned a house at 529 West Street, which was later known as 529 Day Hill Road in Brooklyn. And she notes that West Street was changed to Day Hill Road in the 1920s. Where can I find the deeds showing my grandfather's purchase and sale of this house? Okay, so city land deeds in New York fall under the purview of the Department of Finance. You will first need to find the house's block and lot number, and I'll show you how to do that in a bit. If you're looking for a land deed that was filed before 1966, which is what Helene is looking for, then you will need to visit the Finance Business Center of the borough where your ancestor owned property. That would be pretty straightforward, except unfortunately, historical deeds from Brooklyn are actually housed at the Queens Business Center. So there's always exceptions, right? So when you go to and visit the Queens Finance Business Center, you will first look at what's called the Brooklyn Real Property Books, which contain indexes by block and lot number. The index entry for a particular block and lot will give you basic and buyer and seller information from the history of the building from approximately 1900 to 1960, as well as what are known as the Lieber and page numbers for all of the property's deeds from that time period. You will then go to the city register's office, which is actually in the same building, and request the microfilms for the relevant Lieber and page numbers in order to see the actual deeds. And you can certainly make copies of the deeds when you're there. So I'm going to show you what the search for a building's block and lot number look like. So we're going to go to so this is on the New York City Department of Finance website. The website is kind of wonky, so I would recommend just doing a Google search for this. So the New York City Department of Finance property address search is what you're looking for. And in this case, we're going to put in the borough of Brooklyn, the street number 529. Now, when Helene's grandfather first purchased this house, it was on what was known as West Street, but unfortunately, you're not going to find anything if you put it in West Street. So in some cases, you might need to do some research to find out what, so if you can't find a particular street, you may need to do some research to find out what that street is called today. But since Helene already discovered that, I'm going to go ahead and put in the modern name of the street, Day Hill Road. And there's no apartment number because this is a house. So, okay, so these are actually the current owners of that property. But the important facts that we get here, the most important facts are the block and lot number. And with that information, you'll be able to find the Lieber and the page number in which the building's deeds are found. And with the Lieber and page number, you can then actually look up those deeds on microfilm. Okay, so my final question from the advanced questions is about finding descendants, which is sort of like the reverse of the regular genealogical process, but it's certainly something that comes up a lot. You know, people are naturally curious about you know, whether there are family members alive today that they never knew about. So one way to determine that is to start with a particular ancestor, not a direct ancestor, but like maybe a great aunt or uncle, or a second cousin twice removed or something like that, and then work your way forwards in time to find out the living descendants of that person. And I'll go through that process in a bit. But first of all, I'm going to read the specific question here that comes from Dan. So East Midwood Synagogue in Brooklyn is coming up on our 100th year anniversary. We'd like to contact the descendants of our old members. We have the old members' names and addresses, but no information on their descendants. How can we find the names and contact information of their descendants? Okay, so I'll start with information specific to the East Midwood Synagogue, or for those of you out there other than Dan, if you know that your this particular ancestor was a member of a specific congregation, then this might be relevant to you as well. So if the East Midwood Synagogue has an archive, I would recommend looking for either old bulletins and newsletters, or annual Yizkor books from the early days of the synagogue's existence. And you should, in theory, find not only the name of the person who is being memorialized, but also typically there will be information about at least the person who, who read the yahrzeit for that individual, or who requested that the name be added to a Yizkor book for the synagogue. In some cases, you may even find information about, more detailed information about the deceased person's living relatives. So that would be one way to start. And I'll talk about how to bring that information to the present day in a minute. For those of you who do not have those synagogue connections, the general way to go about this process is to search death indexes to find your ancestors, to find information about your ancestors' death. In particular, the date and place of death is very important. And then with that information, before I go on, sorry, I will note that state and local laws may limit access to recent death certificates to only the deceased person's heirs or their immediate family. And by recent, I will just say that definition changes by state and even locality. And in New York City, the definition of recent death certificates is actually from 1950 on. So from 1950 on, if you're looking for a death certificate for a family member, you need to be that person's either direct descendant, or I think actually, yeah, for New York City, they just mentioned that you have to be the person's direct descendant. So either they're one of their children, one of their grandchildren, great grandchildren, so on. But other states are going to have different qualifications there. For those of you who are wondering where they can find death indexes for the place where your ancestor died, Ancestry is one major source, so is the website familysearch.org. But a great resource that I would recommend, and I'll put it in the chat box now, is called death. I mean, it's kind of very obvious, deathindexes.org. And that has a listing by state. And then within each state, even by county and city, of where you can find death indexes for those places online. So Rena asks a great question, why not look at US Census information? Yes, that's another great point. So you should be able to get your ancestors, the names of your ancestor descendants up through 1950, because the 1950 US Census was recently made available online, by finding a census record of that person, seeing who their children are, and then you can continue that forward in time, looking up the children's names, and then looking for their children, if those children were, again, only if the children were born before 1950. If they were born after 1950, then you will need to start with the death indexes that I mentioned. So once you get to that post-1950 period, and you want to track people, track a family line further forward in time, you're going to go and search for different types of records pertaining to that person's death, beyond just their death certificate. So things like obituaries, that's probably what you're most familiar with. But also other types of records like funeral home or cemetery records, if those still exist, and probate records, which are the records of a person's, either of a person's will, or if they did not leave a will, then the records of their estate proceedings in court. So all of these different sources, whether it's obituaries, funeral homes, cemetery records, and probate records, can be great sources of the person's next of kin or surviving relatives. So that's why you are seeking those particular records out. I will just talk about obituaries briefly for those. I did see somebody who asked about finding obituaries on newspapers.com. Are there any free subscriptions available? Yes, so free subscriptions, that's tough. There is a site where they, I'm just gonna look it up quickly. It's called, let's see. So this website, the International Coalition on Newspapers, they've created this really comprehensive list of online newspapers by country and also by state. So if I, for example, go into Massachusetts, these are all of the different newspapers that you can see at least portions of online. But important caveats, not all of them are necessarily free. For example, if you were looking for the Boston Globe, that's something you would need to subscribe to, or go to a library that subscribes to it. Also, not all of these online newspaper collections are searchable by name. So if that's the case and you're looking for an obituary for a person, then I would search, for the dates right after that person passed away. I would even say, to be safe, search for the entire month after that person passed away to see if there was an obituary placed for them in the newspaper. So that's a great source for finding potentially free online newspapers, but there are other, databases that are certainly searchable by name that are not free. Those include newspapers.com, Genealogy Bank, ProQuest's Historical American Newspapers database. And again, many of these can be found at public libraries for where you can use them for free. Otherwise, from home, you would need to buy a subscription. Another one I can just mention briefly is, I'll put it in the chat again. It's called obitsarchive.com. This is a paid one as well. However, unlike newspapers.com, you don't have to buy a monthly subscription. You can actually do a search for an individual, and if you find a matching obituary, you would only need to pay to view that one obituary. So it's a pay-per-view model. So that's another option as well. Okay, so now that we talked about death indexes, census records, and obituaries, and let's say you've gotten to the generation that you think is likely still alive. Let's see. So at that point, you're gonna sort of switch gears and try to look for information on that living person. And I would say there's two major paths for that. You can either try to search for the person's phone number or address. I will say that a number of the phone number search websites are rather sketchy. A lot of them will ask you to pay to actually see the information. There's actually not one in particular that I would recommend. However, the other option, if you don't want to go that route, is to search for that person's online presence. And you can do that either, well, I would say you might even try both, but either to Google them, because believe it or not, I would say at this point, very many people in the US, especially, and also in many other parts of the world, do have some information on them on some website, whether it's, something about, whether it's from their alma mater or it's from their, current or one of their past places of employment. Maybe they were involved in some important, I don't know, if they were involved in an organization, as a volunteer or something like that, belong to a particular congregation. All those kinds of things might elicit information about where that person is today and even how you might contact them. The other option is, of course, to look in social media, especially Facebook, that has the largest number of people belong to Facebook. So you can look for that person there. And if you find them on Facebook, you can send them a message and ask, request to connect with them. So those are my suggestions for, going about and actually trying to meet, one of your previously unknown living relatives. Okay, so I think that's, oh wait, I did want to do one more search before we continue. Okay, so I'm just going to show you what an obituary search might look like. So right now I'm searching in the historical New York Times. And if you do an advanced search, Why do I do an advanced search? Because that gives me the option to search within just obituaries. So within document type, I'm going to go ahead and select obituary. And then I'm going to put in the person's name in the search box. So again, I do recommend searching for a person's name in quotation marks so that it finds Esther and Coke together, not Esther and Coke, separately in the article. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click search. And let's see. Okay, so I'm actually not seeing the Esther that I was looking for, but let's just look at another Esther here. Oh, so it's actually Albert Koch, who is the deceased person here. And as you can see, one of the main components of an obituary is the listing of the person's surviving relatives. So Albert Koch was the beloved husband of Florence, devoted father of Anna Neslin, corporate Albert Koch, and so that's the next generation, his children, right? But we even go further here to the generation after that, as he was the grandfather of Leah Neslin. Okay, and I guess that's the only grandchild mentioned, and also his siblings, who may still be alive at this point. And then of course it gives the information about his memorial service and his burial. Okay, so I'm going to take a look at the chat now, and I will stop the screen share. I think I will only have a chance to get to follow-up questions regarding the topics I talked about tonight. If I do not get to your question and you haven't written in advance, please do send your question to, I'll write the email in the chat box here, to gi@cjh.org, and we will be happy to respond with our suggestions on relevant resources. Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick glance here. Okay, where again do we go on the National Archives to search for someone? It's type in the address here. Again, in the chat box, it's catalog.archives.gov. So again, that's to search for a person in what were known as alien files or A files, for those born before 1909. Okay. Do you have to be an immediate family member to request a search? Arlene, I'm assuming that you mean a search for an A file. If it's from the National Archives, you don't need to you definitely don't need to be a family, an immediate family member, because again, those are older files that are now publicly available. Okay, I already answered David Mofsky earlier. Thank you, Rena, again for pointing out census records as the source for descendants' names. How do I find a ship manifest? It's a great question, but that's topic for a whole other session. Did the synagogue have a plot? And Rena and Alan again asked, did the synagogue have a plot in a cemetery? This would be a good source of information for the deceased. Yes, that also is a great idea, because many synagogues did buy their own plots in a local cemetery and then distribute those amongst their members. Oh, and by the way, you can search for where a synagogue's burial plot may be, like which cemetery it would be in, by going to, let me just look up the site quickly and I'll put it in the search box. Okay. This is kind of a long URL here, but the Jewish Genealogical Society of New York created this burial society database. And amongst those burial societies are also synagogues that had cemetery plots. So I'll tell you in which cemetery that synagogue had purchased plots. Oh wait, did I I don't think I sent that on yet. Okay, there it goes. Thank you, Nomi, for the advice for Samuel. I definitely agree that that's one good place to search. The websites legacy.com and tributes.com is a good source of obituaries from funeral homes. Absolutely. Thank you for that information, Rena and Alan. That's especially true for recent, I want to say for recent obituaries, like if you're looking for someone who passed away in the last, 10 or 20 years. Yes, Adele, newspaper.com, I think that's what you meant, newspapers.com, offers a free trial. Many of the subscription databases do offer a free trial. Of course, you can only use that one time, but definitely check that out if you haven't done so yet. Yes, you could also check to see if the synagogue commonly used a specific funeral home. And I will just note that, funeral home, there's no repository for funeral home records. Unfortunately, in most cases, if a funeral home goes out of business, their records are not kept anywhere. They're just, they're discarded typically. So you're only going to have luck finding funeral home records if that funeral home is still in existence. Helene mentioned if you can't find an obituary for the specific person that you're looking for, you can also search for a notice of a relative. your person might be listed in the other obit. That's true. And also actually that other person's obit might give information about other relationships within that family. So for example, if you find out that your person, for example, is the daughter of the deceased person, you may also find out information about that person's children, if the grandchildren are listed, for example. Carol said she can't find alien files on the National Archives website. Again, those are only for people who passed away, people who were born before 1909. And let's see. Oh, actually, there is one sort of complicating factor. I think that I believe that there's some issue with people who, no, I'm not going to go into that. I would just say if you did not find anything in the National Archives catalog, then you can also request, you can also put in a, you could submit a FOIA request. That's the Freedom of Information Act request. Yeah. Let's see. Findagrave.com is also a good site. That's for looking for burials specifically, which certainly could help you pinpoint the cemetery that the person is buried in. But you're not likely to find information about the person's next of kin there. That's something that would be held in the cemetery's files, but not something that's, specific, not something that would be, in an inscription on a tombstone, for example. Let's see. Carol says, I can't find the place to search on the website. Carol, I'm not sure what website you're referring to. If you're still here, feel free to enter that in the chat. And Lynn, thank you for stating that paid newspaper sites often have free weekends. That's true, especially for certain holidays like Veterans Day or Mother's Day. So definitely take advantage of those weekends when you can. The National Archives. Okay, I think I'll just do a quick screen share before we end. I'll go back to, let's see. Okay, so from the National Archives catalog, actually, if you go to the homepage archives.gov, you can go to research our records and then search the catalog here. That will bring you to this page, and that's where you're going to put in the name of your person of interest. So again, in this case, I'm putting in Sarah Berman, and if I hit search, then I see all of the documents that the National Archives has pertaining to Sarah Berman. Now these might be for different Sarah Bermans, but also there might be multiple documents for the same Sarah Berman. So keep that in mind. Okay, So with that, I think I will, one second, I'll just end my screen share again. And there's one more. Oh, you're very welcome, Carol. So yeah, I hope this has been helpful. Please do come visit us, especially for those of you who are in the New York area. But if you're not, definitely feel free to stop by when you come to New York for a visit. We are open now Mondays through Thursdays, 10 to 4. And again, appointments are recommended, but they're not required. And I'll just put in our email address one more time. So for those questions that I wasn't able to get to tonight, please do feel free to email us at gi@cjh.org. And I hope you all have a good night. Bye. Thank you.